a pleasure to be here. I come here occasionally on the Tuesdays and Thursdays for some of the tech scripting stuff. James has said, I have a startup called FamilyGram, and so part of what I was interested in is networking with potential software engineers and other people in the area to get I'm just working out of my house right now, and I have a development team that was over in India, but I wanted to bring things on shore and back into here, so I'm trying to connect there. So as James said, I first got connected to this when I was working at Intel, and I worked in the New Business Initiatives group. So I'm not an expert on the Internet of Things. If you're looking for all of the down and dirty information about software stacks and where all this stuff is going and SOC and the costs, drivers, I'm not the person, and I'm not going to talk about that here. Most of what I want to do is talk about some of the key learnings that I had when I was looking at this problem for Intel. The little background there was I was looking at, as the smart home came into play in smart cities, what became interesting was the concept of what we have on the smartphones today. You have an app store and such, and I was looking at how we could apply that into the home. And unfortunately, we're still kind of looking at how that's happening. That was 5-6 years ago, and it just hasn't moved very fast. We're starting to see an emergence today. But that was the space I was in, and there was a lot of interesting things that were coming out of that, and some of the key learnings from there I applied into what were roadmapped and things that we're doing in FamilyGram, which is about keeping people safe when they live at home and using technology to do that. So what I want to talk about today is just give a quick overview, Internet of Things. You know, people, and I'm going to assume that most people are just kind of introductory to this because that's my level. But what is the Internet of Things? And then the key learnings, the areas that I want to focus on is this thing I call the silo problem. We have device competition. I got refrigerator manufacturers, their devices in my home, and they're competing for the hearts and minds of the consumer. And how does that silo impact, and what do we have to do with the silo problem? So I'll go into that. This notion of inference was really fascinating. Inference is all about I can infer types of things that are going on from these internet-connected devices. Not directly, I control your lights, but when your lights go on and off, I can infer things like your home, and I can infer patterns. So there's this notion of inference that becomes very valuable as we go forward in the Internet of Things, that you'll see the derivation of that value coming in the form of apps. And then finally, just security and control. There's a whole host of things, as we all know, about security, losing our credit cards and other things. What about the security and control in our homes when somebody else can hack in? What does that mean to us? What does that mean to the nation? There's a lot of threat surfaces there that can impact us in a bad way. And as we go through, if you guys have some questions, I think we have until 7 or 7:30, so there's plenty of time if you just shout out or ask your questions as we go along. So stepping back, Internet of Things, it's interesting that it used to have just a manual scale, and that was good enough. I could get on that scale and weigh myself. Now all of a sudden, all of these things are becoming internet connected. So everything, a lot of the things that we're touching today, the objects such as refrigerators, our control systems for the HVAC systems, our cars, the security, the scales, our TVs, everything is becoming internet connected. And those objects are going to, the plethora of those objects is going to be driven by this ubiquity of all of the technology that we have today with Wi-Fi and such. So those are becoming connected, and those example usages that we're seeing, that probably a lot of people, anybody here have a Nest thermostat in their home? I've got 2. I have cameras. Anybody have a Nest camera? Right. So those are simple examples, but the other ones are the light switches, the light bulbs that you can buy. There's lots of things that are starting to show up in the home, and there's questions in our minds like, well, what good is a light bulb when you turn the power off that's internet connected? So there's usage models that are over time going to have to evolve and become interesting as we look at what's happening with the smart home. But the example usages I was using here, besides a smart home, and my passion is around elder care and health care. And how can we use the Internet of Things? And that's a major driver if you go look at Internet of Things in the consumer market, healthcare, we see the watch. This is a speedometer and everything else, and it connects to my smartphone. And we all are starting to wear those, and those can start driving and helping us drive healthy behaviors. So those are just a few of the example usages in the home. I'm not going to go into the smart cities and there's a whole host of things that can happen in smart cities and how the Internet of Things is going to help enable those smart cities. I'm not going to touch on that today. But you can apply some of the key things that we're talking about here over into those smart cities. And the drivers that I wanted to mention here is, why is this kind of happening now? If you look back at the Internet, why didn't it happen 4, 5, 6 years ago? And part of it is that the ubiquity of data connections. We have Wi-Fi in the homes. 10 years ago, setting up Wi-Fi, it just wasn't there. You go out and get a Comcast broadband router, it plugs in, and it has Wi-Fi on it. In fact, Comcast now has Wi-Fi for people that just have an Xfinity account. If they show up at your house, they can get on to their Xfinity account through those. So you see this transformation where I can now connect anywhere on my Xfinity account at all of the restaurants and places, even though I don't have to log into their local one. I don't know if any of you guys have witnessed this, but that transformation has just happened over the last few years with Comcast, who has broad coverage across the US. So Wi-Fi, ubiquity, and then the data plans that we're all getting on our cell phones. The ubiquity of data plans has enabled, and the cost drivers of those going down, has enabled people to put together devices that ride that data plan. I used to work with a guy that had glucometers. So for diabetics, they have a glucometer, and he had that thing wired to the data plan where people could go out anywhere in the United States and they could track their usage. And you see this with a lot of other devices. In my space, GrandPad and others, the data plans are just ubiquitous. You just buy the device and it just comes with a data plan and you can go anywhere. So these are transformative. And what helps with that is that these systems on a chip, so if you think of an internet connected device, I need a computer on a chip, and they're getting real small. They have everything on it, the compute, the memory, they have the radios, everything that you need, and the price of those things is driving down to sub-dollars. And that makes it real easy to add that as an adder if people think it's valuable. Back to my teaser line of an internet connected toaster. When you buy the toaster for $25, a dollar adder isn't too bad. If it's a $5 adder or something, then it becomes prohibitive. So all of those converge together to help enable this whole Internet of Things in ways that couldn't have occurred years ago just because of the cost and the value transformation there. Anybody have any? I'll just pause. If you guys have any other comments or such, we can take questions. Okay, so that's just an overview of what IoT stuff is. And again, I'm focused on the home space, but there's a whole other space of IoT in smart cities. And that's big and huge as you think of traffic flows and other things that you want to maintain in smart cities, power grids. There's a whole section there that you can go look up. But as I was looking at the notion of what I call the silo problem, and I'll use the example of peak energy. PG&E, if you look at in the summertime, we have air conditioning, we get to brownouts because we have 95-degree days, everybody's got the AC units on. So we have this notion of a peak in power consumption, and everybody here, I assume, has PG&E, and they want you to potentially sign up for time of use and all that to help structure behavior. But they also have programs where they will go in, and because the thermostats like Nest and such allow you to turn on or off an AC, there are programs that PG&E can enact that says, in Sacramento, if you sign up for it, we will be able to control and turn off your AC units. So think of, if you're not familiar with that, these things are going on today. But the notion is I want to shave peak load. And so if you think about it in a region, I want to go into homes and shave peak load, because otherwise, if everybody's running their air conditioner, I get a brownout, or potentially it starts tripping breakers and we have blackouts. Bad news. Utility. So let me just back up a little bit. The problem with the silo is that I have all these different manufacturers. I got GE, Samsung, Frigidaire, and they all have now smart refrigerators. So think out a couple of years, and there's the off-brands that sell for a couple $100 down at Home Depot, and everybody has a baseline of intelligence in the refrigerator, and it lets you turn the refrigerator off, and it can detect when the door's open, just a few basic things, but most of it's like, I want you to turn off for an hour or 5 hours, or I want you to turn back on. And it allows this type of a model to occur. The issue that goes on right now is that PG&E has to now integrate typically the way these guys work is you got to go to GE. I got a GE smart refrigerator. It's got that beautiful display and all that stuff that they put on there. But at the core, all you care about is being able to have your utility company peak, shave off, and turn your refrigerator off for an hour or 2 hours. We all have power failures, so we know that the refrigerator can last that long. And the issue with PG&E is I got to set up a connection to the cloud service that GE has. And I, as a consumer, have to also go create an account. And now I got another password, and we all love that. In order for me to manage it and do all that, so I have to do it with GE. And then the next guy over there has got to do it with Samsung and so on. And so from the consumer, it's like more accounts for my Nest thermostat or my Honeywell thermostat or my refrigerator or my washer and dryer, because I want to be able to control the washer and dryer. So when you think of all the peak energy usage, those become complex for consumers. And for PG&E, they now have to integrate to these cloud services that exist for GE and Samsung, because they all want to control this silo. GE wants to control their refrigerators. They have their own protocols and everything else that goes on. And this is the problem that PG&E has, and it's compounded across the United States to every single utility. They all have to go out there and they have to integrate to these, and there's a new manufacturer over here. So they don't get broad coverage. There's maintenance issues because everybody's a little different. Samsung changes their interface, PG&E changes, or GE, and so on. So it's a mess. And so this silo problem that exists today needs to be fixed. In order for PG&E, they just want to make it simple.
Well, I'm sure Nick, Facebook has a way to make the multiple. I'm sure Facebook has a way to make the multiple logins easier, at least the way they tell it. As of 2 years ago, PG&E would come out and for free install a device on the outside of one's electric air conditioner, which saved them the pain of all these multiple accounts and the silo effect. It was evidently worth enough to them to actually have people driving around in trucks, screwing these things onto the side of air conditioners.
Truck rolls, it's pushing $100. And so it's a good point, is that there's a lot of benefit to PG&E, and think about how much benefit there is to PG&E to just be able to integrate to, we'll show them this, but to integrate into a single point that they don't have to roll a truck out, and they be able to control everybody's thermostat. Or, I don't want to put something on the AC unit, but the reason they did that is because of the control systems. It's Honeywell, it's Nest, and so on. And that, it's a good point. And a truck roll is super expensive, but it also shows the value of being able to control those units because of just the way that the whole utility system is structured and their ability to not bring online more power when they need to because they don't want to overbuild and all that. So what I wanted to point out here was there's a lot of pain from the utility in order to do this, and that's why they'll send a truck out and install a unit on the outside of your AC that has probably its own connectivity to, I don't know how they get the signal out because they're not going through your house at that point.
It's SMS over the power lines.
Okay.
Believe it or not.
Yeah.
They also use, they also have, the smart meters use basically a system of using ISM-based messaging via radio, and that's how they also were doing it with the air conditioners.
Yeah, the radio systems, so there's an infrastructure where
they have their own overlay mesh network, if you will.
Yeah. And some of that, I assume they use that for harvesting the power information so they don't have to go up and read the meter and all that. So they found some innovative ways.
And they also turn off your house if you don't pay your bill without rolling your truck.
You just go right to the meter, yeah.
They go right to the meter.
Yeah. So this is kind of the problem that I wanted to highlight, was that every manufacturer typically wants their own little silo. They want to control you, the consumer. On the high-end refrigerators, they got displays and all that, and they want to be able to harvest data, and they use that to sell, despite what you may think, or we probably all think that now after looking at what's going on with Facebook. What I wanted to highlight here was it's not the smart fridges that you see down at Home Depot with the beautiful color displays. What we need is all the refrigerators to conform to this, and the fact that we can get SoCs and technology down that only cost another $1. All refrigerators at some point, especially if you look at government, could regulate that, when you get the smart energy readings and stuff like that, one of the things they can regulate is thou shalt have this capability on every refrigerator that's sold. That's a possibility. So as I was looking at this problem, one of the things that at Intel when I was doing this, part of that was the HomeHub, the notion that you separate out this notion of devices, and devices just become vanilla. They're not a GE device that has its own protocols and everything. It is a refrigerator. So the notion came back that one is I want to push the problem of where the control is down into the home, not into all of these cloud services that they have all their threat surfaces and all the other complexities that we talked about. But the needs for standard for these devices became apparent is that a device, it's a refrigerator, but if somebody publishes standards, and we have standards today, they're just, there's industry standards that industry players get together and go, we're going to all support this standard. You see it in healthcare, and you see it in other industries. And so
many to choose from.
that's part of the problem. There's a standard for every standard. But the notion was I can push this problem down into a HomeHub where the control point is, and that control point then controls all of the things in my house, and they present vanilla things. I have a refrigerator. Doesn't matter what the brand is. I have a thermostat. Doesn't matter what the brand is. All of those things exist in a very vanilla way, and then they control the appliance in the house. And the beauty of doing that by putting those standards is that it allows a lot more control by us, the users, rather than relinquishing control to the cloud and to the manufacturers. But it also gives us the ability to do magical things that I'll talk about here in a second. But so discovery and the capabilities and the services, that's all part of that standard. So when I was at Intel, part of what we were looking at was build a HomeHub that has a very defined API that allows anybody to talk to it, that has all the security and control that the homeowner wants. I just go on there and say, authorize PG&E to control my refrigerator and know that that whole route is safe and secure, and my device would then talk to my PG&E account and everything gets set up. I don't have to go to PG&E and enable all this. There's things that you can do to just make the homeowner experience really easy. And I can also just go back there and turn the thing off. I don't have to remember my password to log into whatever it was for my Samsung refrigerator and another one for over here. If I want to go change things or I get a new manufacturer, I can just do it right there in my home. So there's a lot of benefit to the consumer. Yeah.
Would you ideally just give a new set of firmware to your Wi-Fi router to be the hub?
Well, yeah, the question is where does that hub, where's the hub come from? The likely candidate, when I was at Intel, what I was doing was pitching this to the cable companies basically, because they've got quite a, they've already got the Wi-Fi built in with the modem and all that stuff that sits in your home and delivers broadband into the house. So they were a natural. But then there's also the standalone hubs like you're seeing with Apple and Apple, Google, and Amazon, right? The three major players. So ultimately, the question is who owns and maintains that? My pitch to Intel was we should just build this stuff and enable the whole ecosystem. Whoever wants it, it's Comcast or it's or we build our own. There's a lot of different. It's just not happening yet.
But as you pointed out, I mean, Comcast. The reason why everybody's got Wi-Fi is because Comcast's routers come with Wi-Fi, right? So if Comcast had something in every router, it would just happen. Right, it would just be.
That was why they were a natural, is that you get a one device to rule them all. But it doesn't mean that you can't have other players in there. But it comes back to standards. It's why I have a 15-inch rim on my car, and it decouples the cars and the tire manufacturers. Anybody that wants to build a 15-inch tire or on the rim knows it'll work on all the hundreds of cars that are out there. So the two things that came out of this, one was I need the ability to have this standard that allows discovery of what are the services the refrigerator offers and what the HVAC offers or what the lighting system offers, and the ability to publish it. So these are just kind of more of a technology-based thing, but you have to have the manufacturers to support that. So part of the problem is we want to solve this silo issue is getting all the manufacturers on board of all the IoT stuff, and that hasn't, there's some runs at it, but it's not quite getting there. And the other thing about the HomeHub is you always have to have dial tone. You pick that thing up, it's always working, it's always on. So it can't just be like your TV set. It can't be something that might be used in different configurations. So there was some worry about the way that people were starting to use their phones to actually talk to and control lights. But when I turn my phone off or the battery dies, you have to think through those problems. So the HomeHub, and as we were talking about the routers or the cable modem is always on, it's always there, and so there's some natural ones that people can use.
And landlines are not going away.
Yeah. I gave up my landline this year for the first time. I'm totally just on cell. Because so landlines, everybody's got their personal numbers. But the phone was never a good vector for being other than a remote control is good. So those were kind of the key things, always on, always connected. And the other beauty of that is, as you think about it, it's not just PG&E, there's other usage models, that the app model, as we know from the phone, that unleashes all the creativity of the app model. So being able to put, essentially take what Apple introduced with the app model and the App Store, and move that into a more secure, different setting than what you find on the phone into this HomeHub. But think of the HomeHub as offering up a bunch of services. My phone has GPS, it has a whole bunch of things, calendars and contacts that the apps can potentially access, but when you think of the device things, it's got location and other key features that the phone has. The same would exist in these HomeHubs, as there's key features about the home that you can discover and use, and that app model becomes really powerful for a whole new generation of ecosystem apps development that go on into the home. So the example I'm showing here is that the utility now, actually all they care about is talking to a very predefined interface across the 130 million plus homes, residences that exist in the United States. That's an easy problem, as opposed to having to talk to all these different manufacturers of all these different devices and go to their web services and the maintenance. So this becomes a much easier type of a problem for them to solve. And they got that single point of integration for all those devices that they want to control. They can just interrogate, oh, this house has an air conditioning and blah, 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 and you can package stuff up and make it easy for the utility to actually control your home, depending on what devices you have. You don't even have to register. And when you think about how easy this could be, all I'm doing is signing up with PG&E to control whatever power devices. Oh, I put in a new washer, it's a smart washer, it shows up in this house, they can turn that or schedule that to not run, or the dryer, except after the peak load period's over. So think about those. And for me, as a homeowner, the ability is, I just talk to this. I don't have to worry about all these other services. When you think about, when I was talking about, I got to go to the refrigerator website over here, and I got to go to my Nest website over here. If I want to do anything, once I've set things up, there's times I might want to go back in and maintain them. So it moves the problem, and it moves the security down to me, and I have total control as opposed to letting that loose in the cloud. So the notion is we're not there yet, and you're starting to see an emergence with Apple, Google, Amazon, Samsung, Comcast, all the cable provider, AT&T and such. These guys are all starting to try and move in there and get the control of the ownership of that by selling their devices into that. And this is starting to merge now, and we'll see how things move. Anybody here tried to set up remote controlled lights in their home? Yeah. I went down and bought wall switches thinking, oh, Levitron or whatever the name of that company was. I got some down at B&C, and I'm a software engineer. Technology, I for the life of me could not figure out how to get that darn thing working. Because it had a service that went up to their cloud, you had to do some weird things, and just the functionality was just amazing how I thought that would have been solved. Nest is starting to do a good job, at least with their cameras and devices, and make it easy. But when you get down into the home control stuff, it's just not consumer oriented. I'm not an electrician, but I was replacing light switches, so I know how to do that much. But it was just for the life of me, it's not ready for prime time.
Was the communications capability built into the light switch?
Yeah. Yeah, it had like a Z-Wave, or I don't know what it was, but it was.
So you have to configure each switch?
I only bought one just to see how it would work, and it's like,
Wise decision.
yeah, this looks interesting, but I put the thing together.
Unless you have a
Or is it
controller
Zigbee?
that speaks it, you won't go
Yeah.
anywhere.
No, I was shaking my head after that, and I just threw the thing in the closet.
I was just gonna make a joke that my wife somehow with Alexa hijacked our whole house fan, and I can't use it. I mean, she's got it tied up. So, you know, I've been in the computer business 30
Whoever
years.
gets
I
to it
can't
first.
get,
Yeah.
get it.
So it only listens to her.
It only listens to her.
Yeah.
I don't know what I want to listen to her.
That's the way it works, eh?
Oh,
Giving Stephanie ideas.
Yeah, if I can get the lawnmower to do that, I'll be okay.
and it's always listening. It's interesting how we're, you know, the devices in our house, we're letting in things that are always listening. One of the key learnings I had with when I was working at Intel on this health guide that we were at Digital Health, which was essentially was designed to be a computer for video conferencing with your doctor. And there was a camera on there. And one of the key things that we got from feedback was people were throwing blankets over the top of it because they didn't want that camera, even though we said the camera wasn't on unless the screen was showing you, they didn't believe it. And so the blanket was, you go in and look at the studies as we were doing this, they put blankets, but people don't think about the fact that Alexa's always listening, kind of spooky. The solution was to put a little slide over the camera, so they didn't have to put the blanket, they could just push that over to know for sure. Okay, so that was a quick tour about the silo problem that's not being solved yet, but in order to unleash, the description of PG&E was a real true problem. The rest of them are kind of just local consumer stuff, but when you think of the things that society needs from energy delivery and all the peak shaving that we need to do, I thought that would be a good idea about how this problem manifests itself and where the solution needs to be, and we haven't seen that yet. So that was kind of more about direct control. I can turn your refrigerator on and off, but then there's other things like I know that your door, you open and close the door of a refrigerator. So there's things that we can infer from usage for the Internet of Things, all that data that's going on. There's a direct control and the value you get from turning your lights off and on, but then there's inference. And this is really interesting, is that we can, from the evidence, I can deduce something is happening. So back to my teaser line that if you saw that in the union is why do you want to connect a toaster to the internet? It's like I put some toast in it, go to bed, and the motion detector detects when I get up and the toast goes down, and by the time I walk to the kitchen the toast is ready. It's like what's with a toaster? The inference has broad, the usage of the toaster is really what I'm after there. It's connecting the internet, the toaster to the internet is all about the data and what I can infer from that. And my example here is aging in place, which is the business I'm in is aging in place even though I'm focused on social isolation. But when you look at people aging in place, there's something called ADLs. It's the activities of daily living. So I'm single, I've been living in my home, and I really want to stay in my home. But my kids are concerned, and over time, that if somebody's not checking in on you every day, all of a sudden, 3 months goes by, somebody shows up and there's a stack of mail, I haven't been eating, the house is a mess, I haven't gone out, and nobody realizes that because maybe they just talked to you on the phone and you sounded okay on the phone, so I was okay. But this notion of aging in place, looking at these ADLs and monitoring those ADLs becomes very interesting, especially if all I want to do is make sure that somebody's looking after me. I don't want to be invasive with cameras and sensors in a way, but I do want to know that that they're going to go there and help me out if I get to the point where I need that. So the monitoring activities of daily living, the examples that I have is cooking toast. What does that mean? I'm cooking toast every morning. I'm using the stove. I'm opening and closing the refrigerator door. It means I'm eating. And so the interesting part there is I know that one of those ADLs is that I'm eating on a regular basis, and I can infer not only am I eating, I'm eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I can infer, well, if I'm only eating breakfast and lunch and dinner longitudinally down at the bottom there, it's all of a sudden behaviors change and there might be just dinner. And it goes on like that. And then it might be days where I don't do anything. And so when you think about longitudinally, I can look at patterns and I can look at what happens over time and look for behavioral changes just by looking at the toaster. Because I know that you use the toaster and every breakfast is always toast. And the refrigerator door is opening and closing and all of a sudden it stops opening and closing. What does that mean? It means I'm not getting food out of the refrigerator. So these are the inferences that go on that are kind of a fascinating way to help in the aging service space. Another example is water usage. You can get some meters and look at the flow, and the examples I'm getting, is hygiene, but I can know that in a certain time this much water gets used, it's probably a shower. I can notice that if the faucet goes on and off at a certain time and it only lasts for maybe 30 seconds or something, it might be that you brush teeth, so in the evening. So you can start looking at behavioral things by just measuring the water consumption. The toilets being flushed on a certain amount of time. Those are all things that I can infer just by looking at the water meter and instrumenting that water meter. Not only you could be taking a shower, if you have a spouse, somebody could turn on the water here and there's deltas in how the water is being used. I've got this much water and all of a sudden it spikes. Oh, that's a toilet being flushed. I can probably identify which toilet in the house because each toilet fills a certain amount, a little bit less or a little bit more than the other. So there's pretty exciting things when you think about, and spooky, but you can think about the level of inference that you can gain from hypersensitive instrumentation. And we were looking at measuring spikes on the you just plug a little device into the wall socket and I can identify, oh, that's an AC unit turning on and off, or that's the toaster turning on and off. So there are things that you can do with IoT devices without even putting one into a toaster. I can just instrument your whole house and look at electricity usage. So these are kind of exciting pieces that are coming into play. It's that whole notion of inference. And the last one I had on here was doors. I can detect that the different doors open and close, the front door, the back door. Alarm systems in the house already have that stuff wired up, but what if I harvest that data? I can start looking at that, motion detectors from the alarm systems, and all of a sudden I can look at mobility and your activity in the house. And like I was saying, longitudinally over time I can detect things are degrading, that you're not mobile, you're just sitting all the time. I can look at social isolation. You used to go out all the time, out the front door. Now all of a sudden you go for weeks and never open the front door. What's going on? So these are things that just, not that they're going to be a doc in a box that diagnose you, but it's more about looking at events that trigger, hey, somebody should go check on this. And that's what we're after, is just kind of making sure that somebody's going to check in, rule by exception rather than rule by plan, where you got to show up every day as people are aging. And this is just a little bit of an example of what you can do. The longitudinal analysis that I keep talking about is that you look for declines over time, especially in the aging service. Social isolation was one. Door opens a lot. Now all of a sudden it's not. You're not going out. Maybe you're sick. There's all those things that you can infer from that. You want to go check. Your health issues, UTIs. It's like all of a sudden the toilet's being flushed 3 or 4 times a night. Let's go check and make sure that you don't have a UTI. So when you think of healthcare, it's pretty amazing what you can deduce over time, and we mocked some of this stuff up when we were working in digital health. So the inference, I think, is going to be extremely valuable, not just the turning lights on and off and all the music systems and things that you think about with home control today, but the inference is where those apps are going to start coming into play and being able to harvest that information in valuable ways to us. Aging is a big market for this.
So who's going to store all this data? Are we going to build another whole set of NSA data farms?
Well, part of, and again, it's back to that HomeHub, the notion is I want to put control in the consumer and not give that up. Right now it's like GE wants all that information. Who's a better example? Nest, probably. Well, Facebook, but I'm thinking about some of the manufacturers think they want to do that because they want to monetize the data, they want to sell it, and some of the more, the ones that are more interesting are like the TV. Sony and these manufacturers, they were putting apps on there, and that was harvesting a bunch of information about what you were watching. And then from that information, I can infer your political bent and all this other stuff. And they were using that to sell, and then that's where the value is, and that's why Facebook is a valuable company.
There's actually, so a friend of mine worked on a project for one of the vaping companies. And they have those electronic vaping pens.
I've heard of them.
And you can turn them back in, and they
Yeah.
give you back. But those things are collecting data on when you use it and for how long. And they have different, they subtly vary the formula, and then they analyze the data to figure out what things are most addictive.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of interesting.
And
realizing
you don't know.
These little pens have basically device collecting, data collection units.
And they're harvesting that information from you, and
Yeah.
getting it back. So it's so the HomeHub. The reason I think the other thing is about HomeHub is being the secure place where I want to control my data, and as long as I keep the data there and I don't authorize anybody to take it, that it could be a control point. I don't have the answer other than I know letting those guys in the cloud do it. Nobody reads the the T's and C's when you say I accept, and those guys are selling your data. It's the Facebook problem. Yeah, we've all of a sudden realized that Facebook was selling a lot of information that they shouldn't have been. So the last one on here is about security and control, because as we were talking about, who controls the data, who has access to my home. So one is all of the data that's coming out of my home. People want to monetize that, market it. It's like what radio you listen, or the music you listen to, all the normal stuff. Even the patterns inside of your house might be monetized for something, what your zip code and all the other things that go with that. But controlling who has access to the data is going to be a challenge, as we know, where it's all just sucked up to the cloud and people are using it in ways that we didn't know they were. The TV example, nobody knew that the TV was harvesting all my channels and whatever that app was that they had on there, and it was just sending all that data up and monetizing it in ways that I would never have allowed. And I want to control, part of what I was looking at was, can I control my data and actually monetize it myself? I want to sell that information. I don't want Facebook to make the money. Why can't I make the money off of selling my information?
How did it send it up if your TV wasn't connected to the internet?
Well, for those TVs they were, because they were running apps. And pretty much all the smart TVs today, we're all setting up the Wi-Fi on them or plugging in an Ethernet cable. Well, it's Wi-Fi pretty much because it's so fast. Yeah, if you don't connect, if you just want to just go off the grid, no problem. But the problem is that nobody's off the grid. Yeah. So accessing the data in my home, that's going to be a big challenge. And the other is, on the flip side, is who can control all that. PG&E can get in and control my refrigerator and AC and all that stuff, but what if they get hacked? And what if somebody can now hack into the house? And if you look at it from an individual threat, just being able to detect when no one's home. I remember reading a couple of years about somebody got into, I forget, a security system, but they were looking at when people were, by looking at the data of these security systems, they knew when somebody wasn't home, and you just roll up the van and take off. And especially when you get these home hubs, all of a sudden you've identified a whole bunch of equipment in your house. It's like, that house has got nice stuff, that house not so much. So when you think about what the problem can be about people hacking into the house and detecting, theft is kind of the number one thing, but there might be other non-existent, right? Yeah.
You don't like having the phone number embedded in the password embedded into the firmware?
I just went to my router to figure out, because I had to get the IP address to do something, and I went to the router, and I, for the life of me, couldn't figure out what the password, the admin, or there was the account. So finally, I just Googled, Xfinity, and their default password is password, and the default account is admin. I typed that in, and sure enough, it worked. I thought for sure I'd fix that when I first put it in, but it was hilarious that I was like, oh well, I'm just like everybody else. It's the default password, and that's one of the security threats, is that most people install this equipment, and there's never a force, you've got to change your password. It never, at least on most equipment, it doesn't force you to do it. And so all of a sudden, everybody can, I know how to get into people's routers.
Wasn't there a situation recently with the IP cameras which were installed open? And you could just
Yeah, no surprise.
go on the internet and find,
Yeah.
Baby
They
thing.
grabbed a whole bunch of it in the novel server
Yeah.
using cameras.
They did a study and they found there's like, I think, 15 common passwords.
Yeah,
And there's tools out there to search the internet for all things.
they're all there.
right.
Yeah.
Pretty easy to get through most.
So the basic concept about these threats, there's these individual, what I'll call the theft threat, and then there's that malicious threat. If somebody is just out to do mischief and bad things. You know, either it's an ex-boyfriend or whatever, and they're just out to, you know, mess with you. And they can, if they can hack into your system, they turn on and off your lights, turn your TV, all that stuff, or even to the point of damaging equipment. If you think of, I'm just going to cycle your AC unit on as fast as I can, that equipment's not really designed to, you know, constantly go up and down. There's safeguards, but that's the sort of thing that you got to be careful about. Not that these are major issues, other than the no one's home, because the individual's not so much. What's more interesting is, I would call it from a national threat. So imagine a world in the future where there was a law that all the major equipment, HVAC systems, refrigerators, washer dryers, by law, because, you know, we don't have infinite amount of oil and all that stuff that's going on with energy, is you guys need to conform and implement the basic protocols so that we can have the utility companies do peak shaving. And that keeps all of our security of our grid from having to get overloaded and lose power and all the other stuff that goes with that. But as soon as that happens, I can drop your power grid if I can get into, if you think of the loads that go on with an electric engine motor. Everybody knows when the air conditioning goes on and the lights dim a little bit, right? We've all seen that. So that peak, that load.
Actually, it's the reverse. You want to turn everyone off. That will crash the power grid because they don't know how to shut off the energy.
Good point. I hadn't thought that one. I was thinking more through, it was the peak load.
Well,
But okay,
More damaging.
yeah,
more damaging.
all right. I will change the slide. So either way, I want to control every single AC unit, every single refrigerator at the same time. And to your point is, well, better yet, I'm going to turn them all on, let them go for a few minutes, and then I'm going to shut them down, right? Something like that. So what that can do, and if I can do a coordinated attack across, you know, 600,000 homes in Sacramento or whatever number there are there. So when you think of the implication, and I can do that nationally, if I were able, because when you start putting in a HomeHub and everybody has a standard protocol, I can harvest, you know, 130 million IP addresses pretty quick, and I can figure all that out. And then I can, you know, if I'm a foreign actor and I want to drop your electricity, your grid, the power grid, that's the type of thing that you have to be careful of once you have that broad amount of coverage of control.
I don't think innovative terrorism planning is a good function for this.
There's one other major threat too, which is those devices can be hijacked when they hack in, uses botnets to attack things, and that's actually been done a lot.
Yeah.
With cable boxes and a bunch of other ones that do that.
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier with the thermostats, where people were infecting thermostats, industrial control, and they were able to hack into those because the security is dismal, if non-existent. Nick?
Let us not forget that one of the first demonstrations of messing with the national power grid was the Russians messing with, what's
Ukraine?
Tallinn, no.
Estonia.
Yes.
Oh, Estonia,
taking
right.
down
Yeah.
Estonia countrywide.
Yeah. You know, and who knows what's going on in Venezuela, but they're saying, you know, I don't know if they got the power back on there. It's still down? Yeah.
We got it back.
On a lighter note, this has actually been done. Johnny Carson had everybody flush the toilet in New York City at the same time.
Yeah.
It caused a major water problem. So, I mean, just as a joke, it shows that
Yeah.
even in an analog world, this can happen.
Yeah, you don't have to have 100% participation, but when you think of the or the internet allows me to, with precision, within a second, I can turn everything on or off within the same second. And that load or drop of load has consequences. And just using that as the, you know, from the grid. Imagine there's similar things with other types of, but that one's the one that I was thinking highly of when I was starting to think about where the threat surface was. So the question I have is more, you know, industry doesn't necessarily figure this stuff out on their own. You see they're all competing against each other, and therefore they don't want to get in bed with each other to solve these problems. And so it's more of, is there some room in the future as we look at this for, you know, regulation and leadership by the government that through laws, regulation that would mandate and help, you know, facilitate solving the problem through funding of the industry.
You need to put another data point out there, and that is you need to talk about business threats or manufacturer threats. There's a situation where I believe it was Samsung, in a hurry to get out a smart refrigerator, borrowed a real-time operating system from a printer, which happened to have a known bug in it.
Yeah.
And when the web found out that it was being installed, the web then started attacking refrigerators using a known access point
How funny.
of this printer.
Yeah, it raises the issue around security is all about secure supply chain, all the way back to the chips. You know, you see this with some of the 5G technology that's being sold by a specific company that people are afraid to install. But it's that secure supply chain. When I was at Intel, that was part of what we were looking at, was how do we make sure from the manufacturing, all the microcode and stuff that goes into the chip itself, all the way through, that we weren't being infected down to the point where you get your board or whatever the software stacks and things that people are using. It
And
becomes a
having done government work, I wouldn't trust the government to confirm that everything is all wonderful and good.
no. But I got to raise the issue, like who's going to lead? Who's going to build the roads? You know, everybody's left to their own devices, or do you have kind of a common, when you think about some of the infrastructure that we do build, there's things that we can do for common good, you know, the public service, public good. I don't know the answer, or actually I don't know the solution. The answer, though, needs to be, somebody needs to get everybody on the same page, is what I'm thinking. But that was my question mark. So just a quick summary is I want to go back to just what the internet has done, in the good and bad, but it's transformed our society in ways that I never would have guessed back in the 80s when all this stuff first started coming out. I thought, email, who's going to allow people to waste time reading email when that first came out? And it is kind of a waste now. But, but on communications, when you think about email is the number one, but the phone, we all think back to, we had local calls, and then we had calls that cost money and long distance calls. And the internet is just party lines. I had one. You pick it up and Mrs. English was on the phone, so we had to hang up back in the day. Date myself. But I was just a little kid then. But the phone systems, when you think of communication, the audio and video, we have Skype calls and all that. But on the bad side, as we all, I'm sure everyone in this room, is VoIP, the whole internet and doing VoIP calls has unleashed robocalls to the extent where I read they estimated 10 billion robocalls were made because of what they've enabled, this free calling and spoofing of the IDs and all that stuff. 10 billion in the first, since January, so 2.5 months, 10 billion robocalls. And this is an example of where, the carriers, they aren't doing anything about it. They claim they're going to do something about it and they're going to implement some stuff, but at the end of the day, what really gets them moving is government coming in and fining them for allowing this to occur. And that's where I come back and say, there's an example where you need government regulation because they have been slow to react and they still haven't solved it. And I get 4 or 5 easy a day, and I've read some people are getting 50. It's just crazy. And so I don't even pick up my phone now, and it's all over the country. So good and bad. It's unleashed e-commerce with Amazon. I can get stuff delivered to my house tomorrow, which has also killed off a lot of the boutique industries in our town. And that's the sad part. So there's good and bad. All the applications on the smartphone, we got health applications and exercise, all the things that we're doing with our smartphones has just unleashed things that I never would have imagined with the technology. Entertainment is driving the cable companies out of their core business of selling cable packages over to the cord cutters, which is what I first started doing it myself. So entertainment, social networking, we know the rise of Facebook and how that's transformed the way people interact with each other. We just sit at home and we spend all of our time or on our phones rather than actually interacting with people face to face. I guess we could have just done a Facebook Live and you guys could have sat at home and watched this. So there's good and bad. I don't want to knock Facebook, but I think there's pluses and minuses. But the internet has unleashed all this. I can work anywhere. I go to work, I come home, I bring my laptop, I can work more hours at night, I can work on the weekend. Benefit, but also not so much of a benefit. What I loved about the internet was a lot of just the knowledge at your fingertips, because when I was doing research at Intel and stuff, you think back, you used to have to go to the library and buy all these things you have to read, and now I can just go to the internet, type stuff in, and I can be an expert on stuff within a day or two, which is amazing when you think of what it used to be, where you'd have to, they had, I forget what those things that would scrub the internet and find articles and various stuff that, yeah, it's before that. Yeah, well, they were spiders, but there was a couple of them that I started using years ago. But the knowledge at our fingertips. So what I wanted to point out was we have this massive transformation when the internet became ubiquitous across our homes, the high speed that was going in. We're getting internet not only cabled into the house, but through wireless. All of that has transformed our, if you look back over the last 20 years, it's been amazing what's happened. It just kind of makes your head spin when you go back and think the iPhone didn't show up that many years ago. And all of a sudden now, everybody's using apps. It's amazing what's happened. And I'm looking at, and my call out here is that the IoT, the things that I talked about, with all the smart devices and the inference are kind of that next phase of value that you're going to see in the internet. We already pretty much laid down what the internet does for us today, from shopping, all these things that I put on the top. But the IoT is that next phase because it enables all of this new value that has not come online yet, but it's just starting to emerge. And we're going to see the smart home. We're all starting to experience that as we put in remote controls and other things that are going on there. Smart cities, if you haven't looked at it, it's fascinating what's going to happen and what a lot of the transformation that's going to go on for the next 10, 15 years as people develop out the smart cities. And a lot of stuff that's really good for us is just in that health, wellness, and aging space, and how the Internet of Things will help us become healthier, more secure as we age in our homes, which is where my passion was. So that's it, and I'm right under. Thank you. Is there questions?
So in Japan, the way they're looking at that whole aging in place is more on the home robot side. Like you create a robot that's humanoid enough that it becomes like your in-home caregiver, and it can do all those same kind of sensing things. Like, oh, did you open the refrigerator? Did you make food? What's going on? There's obviously some benefits to that and some issues. Do you think that's a Japanese cultural thing? Like it's going to be, that's why it's like the direction they're going versus the US? Or do you think that would also happen here? Like at some point you're going to have the in-home humanoid-ish looking enough robot that's your aid, or at least your monitor.
Well, on the monitoring side, some of the innovation in the Japanese markets, they're always kind of probing. You see somebody's got a fake cat that pets. So when you look at the application for those, it says people get more into the cognitive decline. But people that are, one is, it's like, I don't really want a robot or a fake cat unless I'm kind of like not really paying attention to what's going on. So I don't think that's going to be applicable. The other issue is the cost. It's like that robot, when I can just look at an instrumented refrigerator and the things I was talking about and instrument your house for $100 as opposed to that $1,000, $2,000 robot, it's not cost effective and it's not personal. It's not really, the AI, at least today, there are those things with a screen on it and it rolls around the house and it's a tripping hazard. That's the way I look at it.
It's definitely.
So certainly from the sensing, the robot is more of a companion. So where it became interesting is that becomes a companion. And you see those in nursing homes, not in the home. So I think the application is going to be more in nursing homes, and they become, they roll around and they go talk to somebody, and they become a companion. That's the social isolation part. The sensing and actually buying one of those for the home, for the mass market, short of the price dropping down to $10, $20, or you lease them, might be interesting. Again, you're dealing with a lot of complexity in the house, getting around into different bedrooms, and the problem that you're trying to solve, I would question where that's going. But I do see those in retirement communities where they have a controlled space and they all of a sudden, they can poke these things around and they show that people have fun talking to them and conversing.
I'd actually heard just Alexa could do a lot of this because it can hear a refrigerator opening and closing, water getting turned on and off, a microwave running, right? So you can use sound to do a lot of that same sensing.
Anybody saw the Saturday Night Live skit with Alexa? Google that. Just Google Saturday Night Live Alexa, and they have a little skit where the guy's talking to Alexa, and it is completely. And that's kind of a more interesting. Voice is coming. Voice is frustrating. I don't know how many people here. I've got an Alexa. I've got a Siri. And it's like okay most of the time, but you got to really speak succinctly. You have to not have background noise. So there's a lot of issue with voice, but I can see within the next 5 years even, where they just got that nailed. And it's pretty, and then it becomes a conversation thing, and it can help control your house and do a lot. And so as you look at the things that Alexa, and once Apple gets into the game, there's back to my point of inference is like it can talk to you and check out how you doing today, Mom, and things that it can do to help. Like you said, I can detect noises like the refrigerator and other things that are opening and closing potentially. But you got to be careful of false positives, false negatives. It's just, there's a book about, I forget what the name is, like the knowledge singularity, and the guy's mapping out, from thousands of years ago how our knowledge and how society has progressed, and he's predicting, within the next 20 years that we're going to finally reach a singularity. And you can, if you look back and think about what we have in, the smartphone and the advances of all of speech recognition, the things that are happening today. That were just unheard of, 64K memory. That was a lot back in the day, right? Now it just. But to your point, I think that eventually all of the things that you're seeing right now with voice recognition, natural language, and the convergence of what they're doing with AI, there's some fascinating things that are happening in the AI space that you couldn't have, 20 years ago or whatever it was, Lisp and other stuff that people were using to try and hack this stuff, and it's amazing what's happening.
So I was at San Mateo at the Maker Faire last year, and IBM had their quantum computer mock-up there that they're working on. I don't know what the status of that is. Once that is developed and produced, en masse, the safety of passwords in the internet will be at a much higher level, and so which is a good thing. Hopefully we can protect a lot of these devices, but we always have the threat of an EMP from places like Iran or North Korea that could just shut everything down back to the 17th century. So hopefully somebody's working on making that a little better protected than what it is now.
There is that threat. Yeah, I'm not familiar enough with what is being done, other than we all know that, in terms of electricity grids and all of the things that we would hope that our government is focusing on. I think as I was sharing with people out there, there was infection of all the electric utilities down in Florida that never became apparent, but it was that there was a foreign entity that could have shut down that the security company I was talking to.
Die if they don't have AC, so yeah, that's like.
Yeah, well, it comes back to the hospitals and other stuff. But you're right. People die in heat waves too. Florida probably doesn't get that hot, but yeah.
I'm kind of, this is a little bit tangential, coming back around to this. I'm kind of involved locally with a local group that's informally referred to as fireflies. And what it has to do with what can you do in order to help make the community safer from a fire standpoint. And one of the problems is, there's a lot of problems, but is how do you communicate to people that there's a problem? And the first problem you get into is that we use code red. That implies that you have a cell phone that's operational that'll wake you up in the middle of the night and so forth. So for the lowest level is you almost need to have a Internet of Things thing in your house that fires off, or a smart, that's the simplest thing, a smart fire alarm in your house.
Yeah.
that can also be triggered, if you will, from somewhere else. But then you also have the problem is that we're just universally, we're all now connected via cell phones and via the internet. And in a fire situation, the first thing that goes down are the cell phones and the internet.
Yep.
And, you know, once it goes out, you can't notify anybody at all. And one of the solutions that is, oddly enough, is that that can be mimicked and possibly partnered with is that, for example, PG&E uses the ISM band in order to communicate into all of the smart meters.
Mm-hmm.
So you already have the intelligence, if you will, and you have an overlaid mesh network that covers the entire community. Send a message out, if you will, over an ISM network, and
Yeah.
trigger, if you will, your alarm in your house. But anyways, the bottom line is from a fire standpoint, it's great that we have the internet, but keep in mind that the first thing that'll go down if there's a problem is the internet, and the cell networks and everything else. They're all tied together. And then you get into this other situation is you know, there is no requirements that you have backup for any of this stuff.
Mhm.
If there's one fiber line cut, all of Nevada County and Sierra County can be disconnected.
The backhoe problem.
The other thing we learned, if you will, from the Paradise fire is that while, you know, you may have setback requirements that you want to keep brush away from your house, there are no requirements for cell towers. So even though
Yeah.
the antennas and everything else survived, all the electronics at the base of the tower burnt up
Burnt
almost
down.
immediately.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Well, you'd think that some of the cell companies, whoever owns the towers, would start paying attention to that.
think
But
about that.
yeah.
But
They got-
so I encourage anybody, if you will, if they're trying to build a cell tower, you know, write into the regulations
Yeah.
and say you've got to, you know, A, have it hardened, B, you know, make it so that it won't burn up immediately, have a defensible space around cell towers, things of that nature.
Yeah, those are challenges, and you know, some of us just fall back to the old-fashioned way of the cop car going through the neighborhoods, telling people get out.
Well,
That's sort of
The other half, by the way, is that Verizon and AT&T are trying to sell to emergency our first responders using cell phones rather than having their own backup radio system.
yeah,
And once again, though, the first thing that fails are the cell phones.
the cell phones. Yeah.
So beware of that.
Yeah, penetration, I mean, that's the basic problem is if everything goes out, how are you going to get people transformed to, you know, is it really a problem that you care about? We saw with Paradise, it's devastating, but, you know, to force something across the entire U.S. or at least all of California becomes problematic because, you know, people they don't even get the brush out of their house, you know, around the house. So it's one of those,
Right.
you squeeze it here and nobody conforms there unless they're driven by fear and immediate action has to be taken. Otherwise, we all, you know, Paradise happened and, you know, we're all starting to think about it, but what would force us is the insurance company saying, you got to do this or I'm killing your insurance on your house. And that's what gets people's attention. Well, I know they are, but that's what it's like, you know, for years it's always been, please, 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 do your brush. And now they've got a little teeth, which is, oh, I'll give you a $100 fine if you get a ticket, whereas before you didn't, whatever that was in the union. But the real thing is you're going to lose your insurance. Therefore, your mortgage and all that other stuff gets tied together, and that forces people to think about it. But I hear you. It's like, what I was talking is kind of like imagine into the future where things might be in 10, 15 years. And I was just kind of looking at the roadmap at the time, and these are some problems we'll have to solve to get to that point. But then all of the, you know, the problem we have is my refrigerator is 30 years old. I'm not buying another one, that sort of a thing. So some of these just take time to refresh. I have Nest thermostat to control the heater, but I never use that anymore because I just keep it off and use the fireplace and such. But the Nest and the stuff in the house are like Sonos speakers. You know, they're kind of like just technology that's connected up to the Wi-Fi that then goes off, and, you know, music, TV. But really the only home control stuff that I've been using late was just the HVAC control. I haven't bought smart lights or any of that stuff. They looked okay, but I was like, I know how to. That was why I bought that switch. I thought, oh, I can use this to turn my lights on when I drive up and turn on the outside lights. And for the life of me, I couldn't get the thing to work after I replaced the other wall switch, which is, you want to use the existing infrastructure. So those are my experiences. It's just, oh, and I have Nest cameras, so for security.
Very much.
All right, well, thank you guys.